Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm your host, Brian Sherman, Content Director for IoTSSA. And joining me for today's episode is Neal Bradbury, Senior Director of Business Development for Barracuda MSP, a provider of security and data protection solutions for managed service providers. Neal's responsible for generating greater business value for the company's MSP partner community and alliance partners as well. Today's discussion will focus on spear phishing and stopping those type of targeted attacks in their tracks. Welcome to the Secure Connections podcast, Neal.
Thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. After that introduction, let's see if we can get into spear phishing, huh? It's going to be an exciting topic.
It is. It's one we get asked a lot about too. So we'd love to discuss some of the intricacies, and I know you have some great information to share with us today. So I always love to give our audience a chance to learn a little more about our guests who are new to the podcast. Let's start out with what is one unique or quirky, fun thing that everyone should know about Neal?
Oh boy, this is the softball question. Let me think. All right, so I came up with one. So what many people, you and I, we're on a computer all day. Everyone probably listening to this is on a computer all day, helping clients, dealing with tickets or trouble issues, service desk, et cetera. So people may not realize this. One of the things that I did many, many years ago was I bought a big old John Deere tractor, and I love to cut the lawn on my property. It has nothing to do with computers. And there is this feeling of completion when you can look back at the yard and say, oh, wow, doesn't that look pretty? So for as many years as I can, I've always attempted to, and this may change as my kids get older, but I attempt to actually go and manicure my own lawn and kind of get outside and play with the tractor.
I completely understand, and I managed to avoid having my kids do it now that they're all in college. And my wife keeps offering, just so you know, too, and that's one of those things. It's my quiet time. It's my time away from the phone. So
Exactly.
I wholeheartedly understand that part. Like 2 hours of not quiet time, but me time.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's shift to the security topic of the day. Spear phishing attacks are on the rise. That's one of the things that we've seen, we want to discuss. What are MSPs doing to educate and protect their customers and themselves? We've seen some other things even as recent as yesterday as far as some attacks from these rapidly evolving threats.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question, Brian. And I'll probably take this in a couple of different directions just for some different areas where MSPs can educate themselves. IoTSSA is actually big on this topic too, is that MSPs need to make sure that they defend their own perimeter, they defend their own businesses before they even consider going down the path of protecting their clients, right? So, and I'll probably say that on every one of the topics we talk about today is protect your own house. But MSPs really can educate themselves in many ways. There's a ton of free resources out there. I'm a member of CompTIA. I serve on the Security Community Executive Council. CompTIA's got a lot of great resources and places to start. There's also another one, CyberSeek, which is an organization that helps training of employees that may work for an MSP or even the MSP themselves. The shortage of cybersecurity jobs that are out there is staggering if you go forward over the next couple of years. It's measured in millions. So there's a real opportunity here for MSPs to take advantage of that. IoTSSA, communities such as this do a great job at making sure that MSPs understand what they should be focusing on in their business, what they should be learning. And then I also say vendors, right? I mean, someone like Barracuda is invited to IoTSSA to educate, but a lot of vendors have tons of information on their blogs, on their websites. You might meet them at trade shows. So I'd say, years ago, we used to have this question used to be geared towards how does an MSP learn how to be a better MSP? And I think it's the exact same question today. How does an MSP learn more about security? A lot of the sources are exactly the same. If I then take the spin of, the customer, they have to be careful, right? They've been hearing, customers for years have been hearing that there's these threats, and it's almost like someone's pulled the fire alarm too many times, and not that they've stopped listening, but they just don't know what they can do. So I think a lot of MSPs need to keep the education going in their solutions, such as security awareness training, which is very specific that they can do for their end users, but also just educating them when different scenarios come up in the news about different threats that can happen. And hey, as your MSP, we're protecting you from this threat, and this is how, and leave it at that. It's a couple of bullets. It's a sentence, right? It's not some long article written or some long email that they may not read, but it's, hey, this is the threat, and we're protecting you from this, or this is the threat. We should really investigate how we can protect your business. I think the education goes both ways. So, just a few different ways there to stay ahead. I will say that the threat landscape is evolving so fast today that if an MSP is not constantly looking as part of their monthly, weekly, quarterly endeavors of trying to stay educated, then they're probably going to fall behind really quick. This is something that needs to happen as part of the normal course of business.
Sure. And to your point, is there's so much information out there right now. How do MSPs get that message across so that it doesn't just become white noise? You see so much, you get hit with it left and right. Is there any particular tricks that you've seen, or I should say best practices that you've seen used by MSPs?
On the MSP side, I would probably say it's because it's almost filtering the news sources for the end users. Mm-hmm. This is the attack that's happened, and this is what to do about it. The example I bring up is that whole sextortion email thread, which is actually one of the things we'll talk about today in spear phishing. But users started to freak out. A lot of MSPs were proactive about it. Of, hey, you may get an email like this. This is what it looks like. Avoid this. Don't send it to us. You'd be surprised how many people send an email. Hey, is this bad? What should I do with it? Well, first of all, delete it and don't send it to me. But I would say a lot of it is try and filter through that noise, to your point, and summarize or weekly newsletters, et cetera, to educate their clients.
So it's finding different ways to engage with them, so it's a conversation, not just somebody, the radio on in the background kind of thing.
Very well put. Absolutely. Yes. Agreed.
Very good. Fewer security experts are sounding the hacking alarm anymore. The black hatters remain a concern. Email attacks seem to be the bigger problem. What type of trends are you seeing, Neal?
Yeah, we're seeing at Barracuda the exact same thing. A lot of it actually has specifically to do with email. There's one stat, 93% of all data breaches are starting with an email attack, which is staggering. And if you look at, small businesses or MSPs, how they run their businesses in general, the amount of reliance on email is huge. Yes, there's other business productivity tools like Slack or something else that's come up, but a lot of it is still really done by email. So I always say, spear phishing, if people actually that did spear phishing could actually join the marketing community, they'd probably make a fortune, because at the end of the day, a lot of these hackers and a lot of these threats that come in through spear phishing, it's just very creatively worded emails that know how to get through a gateway or know how to get a user to do a call to action, although malicious and bad and not good. At the end of the day, that's what they're doing. Different cyber criminals are doing it different ways. Barracuda went down the path of trying to analyze what they were doing, and they looked at about 360,000 spear phishing emails over a 3-month period. And what they found is a few nuggets, right? The week before Christmas, the amount of spear phishing attacks goes up 150%, which makes a ton of sense. What are people doing? They're shopping for the family. They're ordering something from Amazon. They're more susceptible to see an email and accidentally click it or just assume it's part of what they're normally doing. So again, makes a ton of sense, but people need to be vigilant to make sure they don't fall victim to it. A lot of hackers or people that are doing spear phishing, they know how to target contractors or temporary employees. And the reason is they may not go through the same training as employees go through. So they're more susceptible to these attacks. Again, the weakest link. And I'll say this one again, right? They are so good at crafting these campaigns and these emails. They've almost put their marketing hat on to figure out how to actually get a user to click, and they measure their click-through rates, right? Sure. That's how they make money. And the other interesting thing, which I would think it would be the opposite, nowadays, if I was to send a newsletter, right? And Brian, I don't know when IoTSSA sends theirs, but Barracuda MSP, we send our newsletter on Saturday mornings, right? We know that more MSPs will read that email on a Saturday. But if you look at it from a business perspective, most of these people doing spear phishing attacks send it Tuesday through Thursday, because that's when most of the work gets done. It's actually looking at those 360,000 emails, 20% of them actually happen on a Tuesday, which makes sense. But they have figured out the same email patterns that marketing companies have figured out. So it's definitely stuff to remain vigilant and to watch out for.
Sure. Hope to sneak it in when people are busy, not paying as much attention, and it's part of the routine.
Exactly. Totally.
Yeah. I had a good example probably last week is, from time to time I get contracts from DocuSign. And last week, and it was probably Wednesday or Thursday, I got an email in that looked official for DocuSign. As I looked down through there, it was suspicious because I wasn't expecting one. And I sent that over to my MSP, who looked at it and said, yeah, that's a very good spear phishing campaign, but it looked legit. And if only I had realized, normally I would have just clicked on it and then expected to sign a contract, but it was obviously virus laden.
Absolutely. Trying to get you to click that link.
Yeah, but it was so good. I mean, to your point, they're getting very sophisticated with their attacks, not just on what they look like, but their timing.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Great. Well, I understand spear phishing is a rather broad category, but what types of attacks are businesses and individuals, for that matter, currently experiencing?
Yeah, absolutely. A few years ago, spear phishing was the category, and now there's actually subcategories of spear phishing, to your point. You just brought up a great example of one with DocuSign, which is, impersonating a brand, which has a very high reputation. One stat, 8% of actually that category of brand impersonation emails come from DocuSign, based on our research, right? And 83% of all these spear phishing emails are trying to impersonate some type of a brand. The other one, subcategory there, is like blackmail, right? And that's that sextortion scheme. There's literally no links in an email. There's no attachment in the email to be malicious. It's the contents itself that make it malicious, right? And what the hackers have realized is, and I don't know if you've ever run your usernames or passwords, it's a scary thing, but I've been pwned, right? Is the website. You can run your email address or possibly a used password through it, and it looks through the dark web of the hundreds of thousands, actually it's millions at this point, hundreds of millions of lost credentials to see if your credentials are out in the world. And what they've realized is, on the blackmail side, they can combine your email address with your credentials and make that email have such validity that it freaks out an end user. I mean, I remember the first time that I got one, and it was like, here's your username, here's your old password, you owe us money, and we've been watching what you've been doing online. It's like, what do you do with that if you're a normal user, right? It's like, Oh my God, where do I send the money now, right? Now, of course, they go into details of what I was doing online, and you're like, I didn't do that, right? But think about a normal user and what they're doing online. It was interesting.
So brand impersonation is like marketing, but blackmail is more like sales because they're closing.
Exactly. Yeah, no, they're going in for the hard close. Absolutely. They practice their Sandler techniques and they're good to go.
Wow.
And then that real third category is business email compromise. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, there was an example of this. It might have been this week or last week, where Microsoft had a support rep's credentials taken, and they were taken for a couple of months, where they had access to different users' Hotmail accounts or Outlook.com accounts. Hopefully I'm quoting it right, but essentially that was a business email compromise, because that support rep's credentials were taken. And although there was nothing immediately maliciously done, it allowed the hackers to watch many things for a couple of months. And business email compromise is usually attributed to CEOs, where this is where a lot of the money laundering and transferring of monies to the wrong folks comes in. I was talking with, an accountant a few weeks ago, and you get the story of where one of the CEO's credentials were taken, and they just watched. They had the credentials for months, but they watched for that opportunity where they were about to do a wire transfer of size, got in the middle of the email, swapped out the routing number, and was able to get the innocent controller to transfer to the wrong account, right? And there's nothing that could have been done because they hacked. I mean, there's some stuff we'll go over in a couple of minutes as far as how to prevent and best practices, but that is such a dangerous thing to have happen, and you can do so much once the account's been compromised. And according to the FBI, since 2013, about $12.5 billion has basically been subjected because of this, or taken because of this business email compromise threat. It's staggering. It's a business.
Well, thanks for differentiating those, because it really does, you can see how the different approach. I mean, in the last one, it's more like the Ocean's 11 kind of thing too, where you just sit back and plot and wait for the right circumstances to happen to get the most money.
Absolutely. And as you break them out, you realize too, there's different best practices to prevent each one of these subcategories, based on the threat. I mean, they're all threats, but there's different things that can be done for each one.
So what are some of those best practices that businesses should be following, and that's he's helping them follow?
Great question, Brian. So there's a few, and some may realize too that some of them actually have nothing to do with email. And I'll start there first, right? Do you invoke multi-factor authentication? So if one of the biggest threats is this business email compromise, we need to make sure that a user's credentials can't get taken. So just invoking, multi-factor on the different SaaS services, especially email. This is something an MSP should be doing for their own services, but even an MSP for end users. Training. And we started the whole podcast off with this, right? How do you train a staff to recognize a bad attack or a bad email, or to question something before they take an action? And there's a ton of tools out there that you can put in place as an MSP or for an end user to educate them. Data loss prevention, again, this is more on the gateway, but a lot of vendors have solutions where if they see a social security number, a credit card number, or even you get to the extreme of a phone number, it'll actually encrypt the email and prevent that personal information from leaving the email service and being sent to another service or another email. A little bit geekier, but very valid in the big business, and it's DMARC. And just to make sure I say it right, I'm going to read it. So DMARC is domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. And maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I haven't had to be a tech in many, many years. It's in my world, it's the new version of SPF, or Sender Policy framework that we did many, many years ago. But DMARC is incredibly helpful at validating to make sure that this person or this server is authorized to send on behalf of a domain. The challenge that a lot of MSPs run into, to talk against myself here, but I'm going to do it on purpose, is most small businesses don't know how to set up services properly. They need an MSP. And so what happens is you'll have one small business that will set up DMARC and try and do everything properly. And then what happens is they can't receive emails from everyone that didn't configure it properly. So they come back to the MSP and they're like, hey, all that security stuff that you did for me, I now can't close deals. And it puts this MSP in this interesting position. So there are other opportunities there where DMARC may not be an option for on the small business, but options such as account takeover protection. Can you detect when one of those accounts or that business email compromise has happened? And you can. And there's solutions in the MSP space and in the general security space to make sure that you can know that as an MSP. Don't rely on traditional gateway services. And I know that sounds funny. Look, everyone should have some type of gateway email-based protection, right? Make sure that no virus is coming in. Make sure that there's no malicious links or something bad with attachments. They call them advanced persistent threats, right? Everyone needs something that scans for the known threat when an email comes in and out. And every MSP should have something deployed for themselves and then also all of their customers. And that's a best practice. So deploy that. The next step on top of that is, and it's a layered approach, is some type of artificial intelligence type solution. And it sounds geeky, it's not. How did we end up getting a lot of the information for this study, the 360,000 emails, right? When we looked at them. Again, there's services that Barracuda has to interrogate what these spear phishing or these bad emails are when someone has flagged an email as bad and it needs to be looked at to make sure we can educate our services that we use to protect our clients. There's an AI that happens with the different products, and we're not alone. Barracuda that has one. Of course, we're the best. I'll throw that in there. But there's a bunch of services that can read the email and it knows, Brian, if you're the CFO and I'm the CEO, you like how we did that, right? And I send you an email and said, hey, wire money to this other person. it knows whether that's a real email or a fake email. It can detect that, right? And those are the type of services that MSPs can deploy regardless of what gateway protection they have, regardless of what multi-factor authentication. So that's kind of that next step or that next thing that you're seeing in a lot of, whether it be Microsoft or whether it actually be third parties developing solutions that leverage that artificial intelligence. So just quickly, because I kind of went on there a little while, Brian. So like in the same order, multi-factor authentication, train staffers to recognize and report these attacks, something for data loss prevention, whether that be email encryption or just preventing PII from leaving the premise. Investigate whether DMARC is right for you and your clients and whether that should be deployed. Some type of account takeover protection and notification system to know when credentials have been taken or an account's possibly been compromised. Deploy some type of traditional gateway level protection, but don't rely on it 100%, and add an additional layer, such as an artificial intelligence layer or some type of layer that can even do advanced spear phishing detection.
That's a good list of things to be doing, Neal. The question, I guess, going back, is I know we've seen, as today, if you go to MSSP alerts, there was a provider that was attacked. I won't say the name of the provider because it's happening more regularly, because honestly, it's kind of like anything. The carpenter is always the last one to have a new roof on his house. Cobbler has no shoes. Whatever you want to do is, MSPs don't always have the time or the focus to make sure they're implementing these things themselves, but they should. How would you say MSPs are doing as far as adopting these best practices?
I would say that a lot of MSPs, I put this back in the day of the transition, and there's still a lot of VARs transitioning to MSP. Sure. I would say there's a lot of MSPs that are transitioning into, and I don't want to use the term MSSP, I'll say it, but they're more transitioning to offering security services. And one of the things that is nice about them looking at offering these services to their clients is it's kind of forcing them to rethink and deploy those solutions themselves. I will say, though, that there's still a concern where there's a lot of MSPs that haven't realized that they've got the credentials for 100 clients, for 10 different services for these clients, and their reputation, if something was to ever happen, could be ruined, and it could put them out of business. Especially, a lot of them will say, hey, I've got cyber liability insurance. Well, insurance really only goes so far at repairing a reputation if you're not kind of following best practices or to your point, cobbler shoes, or doing something to kind of show your clients that you mean business and that you're going to do what's right, even if, to practice kind of what you're preaching. So I would say we're not 100% there yet. We're getting there. And I think we're in that transition where people are realizing they need to offer, or MSPs are realizing they need to offer more advanced security solutions. One other point I bring up is you talk with some other MSPs and they're like, well, I'm not a security provider. And it's like, well, do you do automated patching? Well, of course I do automated patching. Great, you're a security provider. And I know that's a very basic example, but most threats actually happen due to invalid patching. And so MSPs have been trying to do or been doing best practices for many, many years. I look at this as them just upgrading their best practice of what needs to be included from a security perspective as part of their managed service offering to protect themselves and to protect their clients.
Excellent points. And I know even at events when I'm talking to MSPs about, the toughest challenge with putting these all in place is usually they know the things they're doing. They're doing the technical side of it, but they have also transition of employees. You have new people coming in and out, and they aren't necessarily always, watching the social engineering schemes, for example, are a good example. They're not doing all the things they should. So it's a continual process. And that seems to be one of the bigger challenges too, is getting the technology in place, but then making sure all of their team members are on the same level. That can be difficult.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. Yep. And especially on small business, right? Whether it's the customer, the MSP, or the MSP, there's just more churn of employees on the small business side typically. Not to say the big businesses don't have it, but when you churn 1 or 2 employees of a 10-person company per year, it's different than churning 2 employees of a 1,000-person company, right? And so that risk is just that much greater.
Yeah, especially when you're very busy. So how can MSPs improve the odds for their clients? I'll switch it to the other side. In other words, how can they better protect their clients from these spear phishing attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brian, I think a lot of them need to start looking, if they haven't deployed some type of advanced solution to these clients, it's time to start looking at it. Every one of them should have multi-factor authentication. They can provide this as a service, gateway level protection to make sure emails coming in and out of their clients' environments are being filtered and scanned for the known viruses and the known threats. And then from there, it's working with different vendors to see if you can get some type of a trial or some type of a solution for advanced spear phishing or artificial intelligence, right? And it's one of those things. There's a lot of vendors. I know on Barracuda's side, we call it the email threat scanner, where an MSP has this free tool where they can go in and they can scan one of their clients' Office 365 environments, and it'll pull out every single email and show to the MSP and to the end user, hey, look, this is a threat that's just sitting there waiting for you to fall victim. This is another threat just waiting for you to fall victim. And there's tools they can do to kind of show the client that they should be upgrading their solution. I would also say a lot of times MSPs look at it from the perspective of, I need to be able to resell this to the client. I think I agree with that. But I think then there's also the case where if you are raising your prices, if you can, every so often, what you put as part of your basic package will change. And I would say that some of these solutions to best practices to prevent spear phishing over the next 6 to 18 months, you'll start to see more MSPs put them as part of their basic package if they haven't already. And I think a lot of them, as we just discussed, have started to put a lot of these different solutions as part of their base package because it's more of a risk to not have it than to try and convince a client they need it. Back in the day, it was ransomware. Probably 3 years ago, it was ransomware protection. And everyone needed some, kind of web filter which was DNS based on a machine, right? And different vendors came up with those solutions. There's still some more coming out today. I think now people have realized instead of trying to do it on the endpoint, can they do it at the mail server in addition to the endpoint? So I think it's an evolution, right? They'll continue to look at their offering and see how they can enhance their offering to protect their clients from more threats.
Yeah, the Office 365 thing, I think, especially for those small business clients that may be somewhat tech literate, it's almost scary because they literally think all the security is baked in. But obviously, the layered security approach is the only sure way to make sure that you minimize the risk.
Yeah, and one objection, just so I don't miss the point either. A lot of MSPs come and say, hey, I don't have the staff to offer these type of solutions, or how can I do it? There are vendors, even Barracuda does this, our security awareness training, whether it be managed phish line or whether it actually be, something such as our Sentinel, which is AI based. A lot of that stuff is run for the MSP versus them having to actually go in and quote unquote, air quotes, manage. So I would say, have that conversation with your vendors and see what options that they have. It doesn't necessarily mean more work for the MSP when you look at it from the perspective of adding more layers of security.
Gotcha. So you're doing the user education and then the artificial intelligence. Are there other ways that you're working with MSPs to kind of lock down their clients' security?
Oh, yes. I mean, the great thing about Barracuda, Brian, is we got a ton of different email solutions, but also network-based solutions, whether it be firewalls. Those could also be managed, from a good perimeter defense. If some clients have some, I'll just mention a few, but if clients are using public cloud, such as Amazon, Google, Azure, Barracuda has a ton of solutions that also, work in those environments as well to protect the MSPs and their customers. So, Barracuda is, at the forefront of trying to make sure that we're ahead of the curve, although it is a game of whack-a-mole sometimes, to make sure that we are protecting the clients and MSPs.
Certainly. So what's ahead for the Barracuda MSP team this year?
Yeah, for the Barracuda MSP team, we look at it as we are helping an MSP create services, deliver those services, and then provide them with the tools to demonstrate what they've done to a client, right? And so as we look forward in 2019, it's that create, deliver, demonstrate. And it could be we're helping the MSP create an email security service deliver that to their clients, and then showing them through reporting of all the threats that were blocked so that they can show that to the user, right? Great thing about an MSP, if you're doing everything you're supposed to, usually you don't talk to the client and the client doesn't talk to you, and then it's justifying your value. Just because over the last 24 months, we started this whole security conversation, that thought process is still there, right? We still need to show and demonstrate to a customer what we're doing. So we've also made an acquisition. We bought Managed Workplace, which is an RMM solution. So we'll start to look at a lot of the security assessment capabilities that tool has to allow our MSPs globally to really upgrade their security posture and point out the different weaknesses that the clients they support might have in their network. What's the password policy? Are there any vulnerabilities? What's their patching? Just to name a few. So we're excited to be able to kind of work with MSPs with that new capability that we have, and go down the path of helping them create, deliver, and demonstrate services to their clients.
Very nice. Well, we've covered obviously a lot of territory today, so that's been great. But do you have any final thoughts before we close out the podcast, Neal?
I would just like to, say, obviously, thank you so much for having myself and then also Barracuda MSP on the IoTSSA podcast. It's been great. If someone wants more information on some of the things that I've mentioned, there's two places I'll send you, which from there you can get to a lot of different information and resources. One is smartermsp.com if you're looking to make your MSP stronger or looking for different trends that are out in the MSP world. Smartermsp.com is where to go. And then if there's anything specific on some of the stats or best practices that I've spoken about with spear phishing, a lot of this came from a report that Barracuda released in March of 2019. Last month. So point your favorite web browser to blog.barracudamsp.com. Again, that's blog.barracudamsp.com, and you'll see a link to that report right there.
Awesome. Great information. So on behalf of IoTSSA, I'd like to thank Neal Bradbury of Barracuda MSP for joining us today, as well as all of you for following our podcast series. I encourage everyone to check out all the great cybersecurity content on the association's website. That's IoTSSA.com. And I hope you have a fantastic and highly profitable day. Thank you.